Welcome back, lovelies. It's Michelle, and today we're going to do a little presentation. I've got to turn this off over here so you can hear me. On what is called the Living Bible, the paraphrased. I like the Living Bible. There are critics against it. However, there are reasons I like it, and this presentation today is going to be all about the Living Bible. The Living Bible, or Living Bible. So you see, this is a personal paraphrase. It is not a translation. It's very important to understand. It is a personal paraphrase of the Bible in English by Kenneth Taylor. It was first published in 1971 based on letters, the epistles he wrote, I think in 1967. Taylor used the American Standard Version of 1901 to base his paraphrase on. This is a quote from the author of the Living Bible. The children were my chief inspirations for producing the Living Bible. Our family devotions were tough going because of the difficulty we had understanding the King James Version, which we were then using, or the Revised Standard Version, which we used later. All too often I would ask questions to be sure the children understood, and they would shrug their shoulders. They didn't know what the passage was talking about. So I would explain it, I would paraphrase it for them, and give them the thought. It suddenly occurred to me one afternoon that I should write out the reading for that evening, thought by thought, rather than doing it on spot during our devotional time. So I did, and read the chapter to the family that evening with exciting results. They knew the answers to all the questions I had asked. That was quoted in an interview by Kenneth Taylor. So what's interesting is basically he wrote this for his children. It's a paraphrase. So it's thought for thought instead of word for word. It is not a word for word translation. It is not even a translation at all. It is more of a commentary. Important to keep that in mind if you use this. That being said, it is a great resource. The Living Letters in 1962, it was earlier than I thought. The Living Letters, Taylor's paraphrase of the epistles became available. Side note, and they were, and Billy Graham actually was a proponent for the Living Letters. The Living Bible was very popular in the 70s and was in fact the best-selling book in America in 1972 and 1973. By 1997, 40 million copies of the Living Bible had been sold. In the late 1980s, Taylor and his colleagues at Tyndale House Publishers invited a team of 90 Greek and Hebrew scholars to participate in a project of revising the text of the Living Bible. And it just took many years of work, and after many years, the result was an entirely new translation of the Bible. It was published in 1996 as the Holy Bible, the New Living Translation. So the New Living Translation is actually a translation. It's not a paraphrase. That is coming from the Living Bible, and the Living Bible is a paraphrase that came from the Revised Standard Version translation. I know. Bottom line is, it's a paraphrase. It is essentially rewording the text with the intention of making it clear and more easily understood. So you see, Taylor never intended for his paraphrase to be a reader's only source of biblical knowledge, or as the primary text. See, rather his goal was to put the basic message of the Bible into modern language that could readily be understood by the typical reader without theological or linguistic background. So I'm going to paraphrase what my slide says to you. It says, he never intended for the Living Bible to be your sole text. It is a complementary paraphrasing of the Bible. You use it along with your King James or your Christian Standard or your ESV. You choose. What is wrong with a paraphrase? Well, there is nothing inherently wrong with a paraphrase, as long as the user of the paraphrase understands exactly what it is. It's not a Bible translation, but it's rather an interpretation, kind of like a commentary on what the Bible says. And this Living Bible is written in such easy language. The Living Bible was the bestseller in the early 1970s. It was the best-selling book in the United States. By 1997, 40 million copies had been sold. During this period, work started in foreign translations. Eventually, the Living Bible was in 100 languages, and from the very beginning of its publication, Taylor had assigned the copyright to Tyndale House, so that all of the money made from the sales of the Living Bible were given to charity. The man who paraphrased the whole entire Bible for his children and published it made no money on it. It was all donated to charity. Criticizers of the Living Bible say that it is the dumbing down of the biblical text to a grade school level, done in keeping with the linguistic and educational trends of the time. Well, it is a simple reading. It is on a grade school level, but that was done for a reason, so people with different varied focuses and different varied reading levels and different varied comprehensions could use the Living Bible and understand what the word-for-word text is saying. It's an easy read. It uses modern language, makes passages understandable to those with weak reading skills, no previous background in Bible study, or lingual contractions such as don't is used for do not. So it is basic, more easy reading, but it's fantastic. And if you read in your King James, and then you do what I do, I read in my King James, then I go to my New King James. If I'm still not getting it, then I go to my Christian Standard Version, I check the ESV, then I go to the Living Bible and I read it, then I go back to the King James. You see, for me, the Living Bible is a resource and a tool. I know it is. So the question is the Living Bible a paraphrase a good resource for you? For me, it was a phenomenal resource, especially when I was a new believer coming back to Christ after walking in the occult for years, new to Bible study. This helped me. Now, the first time I ever read this, I was 12. I read the book of Revelations and I read the Gospels in the Living Bible at the age of, in the 6th grade, so I was about 12. I was able to read it. So if you struggle with reading some of the Bible translations, and let's face it, some of them are harder than others. This is a real struggle. This will help you. But keep in mind, use it for what it is for. It is a translation of a paraphrase. Not a translation, excuse me. And if you keep in mind what it's for, it will serve you well. Now, the way I do it, like I spoke of a little in the presentation, is I read it first in my KJV, right? And then I read it in ESV, and then I read it in Christian Standard, and then I come back and I read it in Living Bible. And after I've read it probably by that time 5 or 6 times, the chapter, and then I come back to my King James after I've read it in the Living. And it makes so much more sense to me then in the more Shakespearean literature that the King James is in. I encourage you to get one of these. Remember, every single one that's been sold since 1971, the proceeds go to charity. You really, you can't go wrong. But treat it like a commentary. But you could easily read this cover to cover and easily get the main point of the Bible, which is God's amazing gift for us through His Son's death, suffering, death, and resurrection, and ascension into heaven. You can get it from here. You can learn all about that in the spirit realm and everything. So I encourage you, if you have trouble reading, go for it. Until next time, guys, thanks. Please comment if you have any questions about the Living Bible, any criticisms, anything like that. Please comment. Just be a little kind, even in your criticism. I look forward to talking to you again. And until then, be blessed. Not the translation of